All right, my friends, we are sitting in the wonderful city of Mason City, Iowa, about 2.5 hours, 2.25 hour drive north of Des Moines. I just finished up the Hampton Inn here, across the street from Dunham Sports. Google it, right? There's a Caribou Coffee right behind me, and it shares a building with some kind of noodle company, noodles restaurant, and they have a Interceptor sits out here in the grass, and the building is owned by the same people that own the hotel. So I come up here every 3 months to do this Interceptor out here that I just finished, and every 6 months I do their grease trap, which I did them first, and then I will do them again in the spring, I think June, 6 months from now, right? Roughly. Anyway, epic level play versus new GMs. I've been Googling around the past couple days on the internet, and I know that there's a whole lot of shit out there, and excuse my French. I've been in a very off mood the last couple weeks. Anyway, I Googled around more than a few times, especially on my long drive up here, trying to find YouTube channels that had some topics on epic level play for Dungeons and Dragons specifically. And there's not a lot of it. At least not a lot that I've run into, which is interesting. So if you're a new GM, one of the daunting things about Dungeons and Dragons specifically, and it can't apply this to most other game systems, because you name your favorite game system, you can only have probably 5 or 7 or so that have multiples of books, let alone multiples of generations, let alone supplements and stuff. I mean, I picked this up a while back at JCD and Hobby in the bargain bin, and I thought, oh, this looks cool. What is this? It is the Practically Complete Guide to Dragons. And I thought, ooh, right, except this turns out to be a 2023 product that's similar to a 3.5 cover kind of motif, and it's a fan product produced by under the OCR rules or whatever for Dungeons and Dragons, which is fine. I'm going to finish reading through it, but mostly it's it's almost like a children's book about dragons. So if you're a new player, this is the kind of book that might interest you, right? For us old hats, that's more like, it's actually disappointing. I was looking for yet another tome on dragons, and what I get is this kind of a dumbed down version of the Dummy's Guide to Dragons, which is kind of what it is. I'm not knocking the work. They put a lot of effort and work, and the artwork is really good, and I'm not knocking that. Okay, so as you're a new GM, and you want to play, or you want to run a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, it's highly suggested that you begin with the BX or the BEX or whatever y'all calling it now, the basic expert sets. You can get them; they're cheap. You can get free PDFs off the internet. They're cheap, but more important is they're rules light in the strictest sense of the term. These are the role playing for dummies. Get basic set. It's basic for a reason, right? So when you get these new players who then decide they want to be a new GM, and I'm all for that. Do not have enough GMs. I cry about that all the damn time. I personally have played far more as a GM than I have as a player in my life. Mostly because nobody's crazy enough, stupid enough, or sadistic enough, or just me willing to step in and say, yeah, okay, I'll run the show. Let me run the things, and I try to, as I've gotten older, I try to cater to my players as much as possible, although I still have some older streaks in me that just rebel against certain things. But we're not neither here nor there. So if you're a new GM, one of the daunting things about Dungeons & Dragons, now you may not say that about the current edition, 5th edition, or whatever the hell this thing is that they're trying to pander now, the 5.5 edition from what it sounds like. Anyway, you don't have as many books to start from, but there's still quite a few. 5th edition has its own version of prestige, a book for prestige classes, and one for epic play too, as far as I can tell. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. I will grant you, I do not have a 10th of the 5th edition crap that got put out. I just couldn't justify the means. I'm buying stuff out of used bins, for God's sake. What do you want? I'm just saying. So you get as a new GM and you sit there and you go into somebody else's. You come in, if you're a new GM and you came into my house and you saw the bookcase after the 2 bookcases loaded with shit and almost 2 freaking shelves just for Dungeons and Dragons related material, you might go, I don't know. Let alone things like advanced play, such as prestige classes, and more importantly, epic level play. As a new GM, you should put those off the side. You should not even be thinking about them except about a distant what if maybe. If you cold turkey jump into that stuff, good for you, but the odds are really you're gonna flounder around and fail. You know, if you think about it from a player perspective, all you long-term veteran players out there who've played for years and decades, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong when I sit there and I say that despite all the extra crunch that's been created for prestige and specifically epic level, let's define epic level. That's anything above 20th level. By all definitions, you are playing with the gods at this scale. You really should be. You should be a very, very rare bird in a large flock of people. That's kind of what I'm getting at there. So epic play takes things to a whole nother level that you really need to be experienced to even have a chance to run well, both as a GM and as a player, but definitely as a GM. Epic level crap is off your table if you're a new GM. Don't even focus on it. Give yourself a year, maybe a little longer. You know what I'm saying? Don't focus on it because you're going to be disappointed. Prestige classes, they're a bit of a middle ground. Once again, as a new game master, you have no business running a prestige class scale anything. You're not ready for it. Even as a player, if you played as a player and got into the 10th to 15th level and started dipping into those prestige classes, which ironically is something that a term they coined circa late 2nd edition, early 3rd edition. Because prior to that, we just leveled up. We followed, there was a cutoff point for your characters, and we didn't care. We just looked at what was there and went forward. So if it got to be absurd amounts of experience points to make the next level, that's the way it went. The idea behind prestige classes, in my opinion, I can't prove any of this, of course, this is just opinion, is that the creators and the game designers and the fan base that contributes heavily to, that's something WotC and Hasbro is kind of forgetting. It's just how much of TSR and Wizard of the Coast crunch came from people like you and I, not by their staff people. Their staff people might have toadied it up and made it look nice and polished and stuff, but at the end of the day, probably 40 to 50% of the content created for Dungeons and Dragons by players, not WotC. They forget that. That'll cost them eventually, in my opinion. They're trying to find an end round around it, use it by laying claim to anything, any intellectual stuff you create, especially for their online platforms that they, because they want this to be an online video game, so they can just find many, 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 many ways to get in your wallet. That's what it is at the end of the day for Hasbro, and it should be. They're a corporation. They're in it to make money. I don't gotta like that, but that's the facts. That's true. I just don't have to support their crap project and their crap material when it comes out, because that's me. And I got many reasons, and you hear me bitch and moan and cry about it all the damn time. Fine. Fine, I say it. Fine. That said, as a new GM, the sheer amount of stuff you need to get comfortable with and familiar with on the basic level supersedes any of this other stuff. It looks flashy and fun. And if you've been a player, it's been flashy and fun. But then now that you're the GM, you're going to discover that that's a whole nother can of worms that you're not really ready for, in my opinion. What we used to do before the concept of prestige classes and epic level play and epic level classes was we multi-class. That was initially where the idea, we get to my fighter gets to a certain level and all he gets good at killing, but at some point I would like him to have a lot more options available. And so what do? We cross class. We cross train our character in yet another class, so we get dual class characters and multi classes. This is where you get somebody with 3 and 4 classes. By definition, those are considered prestige characters, but in the old days there was built-in mechanics to help mitigate some of this, because what did you do when you cross-class? You had to slow down how much you could invest in your experience points into your next level. And in some cases, you actually capped out. So if you chose to start another class, my fighter's at 7th level and I want to start a 1st level rogue or a 1st level wizard, I'm now focused on that 1st level wizard part, and that 7th level fighter is just a maintenance. We're going to maintain that, but it's not going to go up any higher. And so a lot of players, they see the single class characters at the table just booming up in rank and level and experience and abilities, and their multi-class characters so is kind of lagging behind, and they're a lot weaker than what their compadres are. And that is by design, in part because your character choice was to have multiple classes, which allowed you to have access to multiple stuff, multiple skill sets, multiple feats, and potentially things that would enhance your ability as a fighter, and vice versa. So over time, we wanted to become more in-depth and more detailed, and we expanded. And in the process of expanding, think about that for a moment. In the process of expanding the prestige classes, this opened up a whole slew of new character classes that would not have been okay under the general classification. So for example, Warlock comes up a lot in recent years, and I recently read I think I just did a review on a book where Warlock's in it, and the Player Handbook 2, right, for 3.5. And so you didn't find these in earlier stuff because there just wasn't room for everything. That was one of the advantages of the Dragon and Dungeon magazines and stuff like that, and the White Dwarf and things like that when they were around, and still are, I guess, but not like they were. They were much more impactful in the 70s and 80s than they are today because of the internet, in my opinion. But you had those magazines because it allowed the creators and the staff to play around with stuff without actually entering them into a commitment into a core book. So they were able to play a whole lot of classes to see if they were dead ends or just because if you look at some subclasses and some specialty classes, they're so specialized, they're so specific that it takes a special kind of player to be able to play it well. I keep coming back to Bard for new players. It's always a bad choice because Bards are a complicated character and somewhat of a weak character too. It's this jack of all trades. And if you don't understand the concept of the jack of all trades and just how useful that is, then you're at a disadvantage. Once again, picking on my friend Kenny, Kenny would never be able to pull that off very well because he fails to understand the nuances behind having, well, Joe over here, Grognarg over there is a fighter magic user. What kind of combo is that? Well, he's a fighter wanting to be a battle mage, or a battle mage that got fed up with being pushed around by idiots and wanted to use regular weapons and swords. Well, there's a lot of nuance involved there. Not everybody can play the nuances well. And sometimes that shows, and sometimes it has an effect. So as a new game master, I highly suggest you focused on the core rules, the core levels, the early levels, for a good reason. Get that experience. Open that window up. Get some confidence in you before you start allowing your table to push you into very complicated and very complex things, in my opinion. Right? Anyway, I'm Rick from the great city of Mason City, Iowa. And you ain't. Till next time. Yeah, right.